Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jeff Andrews with Business of Childcare. Excited to welcome you to the beginning of our summer series here, focused on topics for community leaders and others, focused on the challenge of childcare. And we know it's a big challenge, and we know that communities everywhere are searching for the right answers. And we're excited today to have a great guest, Barb Wagner, who I'll introduce here in just a second. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit about Business of Childcare and what Business of Childcare is about. And then we'll get jumped right into our topic today. It's a good one, and I'm glad it's one that we're kicking off. Supporting the first provider, right? Launching with one and scaling with intent. A little bit about Business of Childcare. Our mission is to help guide childcare business owners in the communities they serve to better outcomes. And we do that in a lot of ways, which I'll highlight in a second. But since 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, we've been helping communities, we've been helping individual providers, both startup childcare businesses, both in-home family childcare and small spaces, as well as childcare centers. And that doesn't overlook all of the support that we provide existing providers, those that are navigating the difficult waters of childcare these days. And we're excited about our opportunity to continue providing impact. Our big focus when we think about childcare, certainly we expect, we don't assume, but good outcomes for kids is the assumption. When we think about it even broadly for communities is when a child has a quality, safe place to go that mom and dad think about and know is safe, they're much better equipped to carry on with their own life journey, oftentimes a career or job. And what we know is that that leads to wage realization opportunity. Punchline is, if we don't have enough childcare, we know we have adults who otherwise are caring for children that might much better benefit themselves and their families by having the opportunity to go and realize that wage, right? Workforce empowerment leads to economic growth. And for all of our communities that we're in, that economic growth is a key indicator to community well-being. So we're excited to have the chance to make that opportunity with communities. And the basis, the foundation is that it really requires the whole community to come together. When we work with communities, we help everybody who benefits from good childcare in their community understand the why. And it's different for everyone, right? We think about childcare, we think about children, we think about all the great things that are happening for early education, but we know if that quality early ed is happening, if the child's prepared, they're a better opportunity to mold and grow in the education system, right? We know that if we have childcare, even school age care, we don't have young folks running around Main Street, maybe getting into challenges that they shouldn't be. And we know, like I said before, employers benefit, our families benefit because suddenly we find increased productivity. All those help wanted signs I see on the landscape of America, I travel each year, are a key indicator in some cases, childcare being the limiting factor for people to be able to come. So bringing everybody together is a central point. And when we deploy our work, we really focus on 3 stages of readiness. Many communities have figured out there's a challenge, but some still today are trying to determine what is roughly that challenge. Why is the reason to act so critical? Once we have that basis of understanding, we then help communities a number of ways, both with community roundtables and solution activation plans, developing the plan, developing the roadmap that guides our work in the beginning stages and even leads us to those bigger goals that we're looking at as a community. And then certainly a lot of communities have a plan, they have an understanding, but they're still stuck at the proverbial start line, right? We need help on what are the best strategies to activate the plan that we have in front of us. We do that work around the country. We're based here in Minnesota, but we reach all the way out to North Carolina and states between, out into the western states, and we're proud of the work that we do in partnership with communities and providers. A quick success story, or 2024 success story, Moultrie County, Illinois. Lovely area to visit if you haven't. But through the whole process, understanding impact, developing a plan, and then activating the plan, you can see the outcomes there. The biggest one, expanding childcare capacity this fall by 78% from where they were 2 years ago. And it doesn't happen by accident, right? It's all about our intention. So as we think about our goal in our conversation today, it's a great time, excuse me, to introduce both our topic and our guest to have this conversation. We think, as we looked at that Moultrie slide, those outcomes always start with the first step, right? They always start with an early win. Never have I often seen it happen where we had a big, huge plan with fixing everything, and we made it happen in day one, right? That plan even started with an initial first step. And so today's conversation is about how to more localize our strategies to begin with. Sometimes our roadblock is just the enormity of the challenge. And I'm excited to go through that conversation today with Barb Wagner. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a second, but I've known Barb for a number of years. We're excited to have her on our team at Business of Childcare. She's the Childcare Business Advisor, but she's much more than that. She brings a depth of information and knowledge and frankly, just lived experience in a lot of ways that I'll let her share in a second. That'll help frame the conversation. Barb, thanks for joining me this morning. Let the audience know a little bit about you, your foundation, and that journey that's led us to today.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I'm very excited to be sharing all this information with you all today and being a part of the business of childcare. I've spent almost 30 years in the early childhood field, with most of that time being focused on family childcare. Back when my children were younger, I started my own family childcare business in my home. I ran that for 10 years. And during that time, I also became a mentor to help support other family childcare providers, and also became an approved trainer so that I could share, ideas, thoughts, connections with other providers throughout the state. And I actually eventually became also an accreditation observer for the National Association for Family Childcare, and have helped providers go through accreditation. Once I closed my doors, I then, continued with, other roles that pertain to family childcare. I worked with the Minnesota Licensed Family Childcare Association as their executive director for several years. I've done some coaching, I've done training. I worked for well over 5.5 years at the Department of Human Services as the manager of their family childcare licensing. So I really bring this robust. I've got the training piece, I have the mentoring piece, the licensing piece, right? All the pieces um, that really, hopefully, will bring some well-rounded skills to this conversation. So thanks for having me here.
We're excited to have you here. And as we get started, our first focus, our first area to introduce, and I'll have some questions for Barb to help guide us through, is this idea of, as we started, what is the opportunity? What is it that we're actually after? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? We often get inbound calls from well-meaning communities that the ask is we need to build a child, right? And often our challenge is many of our communities don't have the population size or the mass, so to speak, to truly support a sustainable childcare business, even with the best operator. And so when we think about some of the things that defining our opportunity, we think about what is it we're trying to accomplish, right? We think about workforce participation, we think about proof of concept, even that ripple effect. We had one new provider come online. Barb, you've worked with a lot of rural communities,
Yeah.
awkward communities, all sorts of communities, frankly, in your travels. Help maybe share a story about where a single provider can actually make that difference, or an example of that impact, that by just getting one person online, suddenly we saw other things happen. Any stories or thoughts that come to mind in that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm always, because I've been in the field for so long, I really truly believe in the power of family childcare and the power of, like you said, just having one person on board, as the slide indicated, that puts, at least 6, 8, maybe even more families with a real viable option. And what I love about family childcare is it's often very close to home, right? Especially when you think about rural Minnesota, families aren't getting up at, building in an additional half hour. I've heard parents say, yep, I have to travel 45 minutes to find a childcare center to place my child. And then have to commute to their jobs. And so with family childcare, many times they can be right within their own communities, their own neighborhoods, and right, and it just becomes an extension of their family. The other thing I think that is really valuable, what I see with family childcare providers, is that it lifts a provider up, right? It's a small business. It helps them feel like they're a contributing member to society. And one thing that I know about the family childcare field as a whole is we talk. We talk, and one provider connects with another. Back when I was doing family childcare here in my neighborhood, I think there's only three left, but there were in my neighborhood literally 10 of us. And we connected, and we connected with others. And so it really is, it's that firework. You start that one spark and it just builds and grows. You know, I'll stop there. I could keep going.
Well, I think it's a good point, and it also
Yeah.
leads us to an understanding, even as we think about this proof of concept idea.
Hmm.
Right, this idea that a small scale can demonstrate feasibility. And I'm curious if you've had experiences in the past where in some cases that being served up as a solution, it's maybe I don't want to say frowned upon, but maybe hesitant to be seen as a viable solution worth pursuing because it almost feels too small scale. Have you had experiences
Yes.
on that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing up that point, because we often see what's the solution to, our community or our county where we have a childcare crisis. And I think we quickly think to the slots. And when we build a center, right? Oh, now we can have 60 slots versus a family childcare provider may only have 12 slots. Uh, but there's a lot of challenges behind that. A family childcare business can definitely be propped up much quicker, depending on the county that you live in, and hit the ground running and serve those. So yeah, and think about too. You think about those thoughts. I hear story upon story from centers where, yep, they built this program. We're going to have 4 classrooms. We're going to have all these children, but then they can't find the staff to fill those classrooms. And so when they open, they can only open with maybe 1 or 2 active classrooms. When you look at family childcare as that option, right, that one individual provider can serve potentially up to 12 children. And then, we talked about that firework. You get two propped up. To me, it's a win-win. And you think about what family childcare brings. It brings for many families that flexibility. It allows children to stay together, right? So think about that. If there is that center where they can only have 2 classrooms open because they can't find the staff, okay, well, now what am I going to do? Because I have 2 kids. I've got one in school and I've got one who's a toddler. All right, family childcare, you can have both your children stay together in the same program because they're a mixed age solution. So, these are some really, important things to think about when we're trying to serve our communities and get a program propped up quickly to serve the needs.
Well, it highlights for many communities an often overlooked kind of basic math equation, right? I call it the
Mhm.
5% rule. If you look broadly across the country, in many communities, overall population, roughly 5% is 0 to 5. So when we think about our quantity of need without doing any data research or anything else, we can actually pretty quickly understand for every 1,000 population, we've got maybe 50 kids, 0 to 5. And another factor, 20% of those kids actually already have built-in arrangements where they'll never engage childcare. The national statistic that highlights that, right? So we're really down to 40 kids. There's not a center model that would serve every kid because families like choice, families have different and kids have different needs. We're now
Mhm.
looking at to meet that capacity, to your point, and we can do it a lot quicker, a lot less expensive, getting 4 new family providers online in one form or another. A lot quicker, a lot less
Yeah.
expensive. And at the end of the day, I still get my 40 slots. I have maybe some different choices there. So a great just reminder for those that are watching to think about your own communities. What does that look like? I want to pause for a second because I love interaction. I want to throw out our first kind of community pulse check. Love to have everybody take a chance here. We're thinking about licensed childcare in your community that would start to impact even local workforce participation. What does that look like? Love to have you participate. One could make a difference, not sure, is another end of the spectrum. 2 to 3 would be a start. We're getting some votes here. Give a minute here for everybody to think about that. And as we think about understanding the reasons why, now we start to think about what might be that startup strategy, what might be the infrastructure, the tactical support that we might need in order to find success, right? And so I want to share our results real quick before we move on. Right on that low end of the spectrum, right? Where all these votes here all need more family childcare, small space childcare. You don't generally need a new center.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to add too is, uh, back in the days of the pandemic, there were a lot of like programs. There were some businesses that had space and capacity, and literally to serve the need, right? Because during the pandemic, not everybody stayed open. That is exactly what they did. They opened, one space to serve employees or one space to serve their community. And so I think that's, I think about that. It was a time where a lot of people banded together and said, hey, at least if we can get one person to support the families that do still have to come to work, in person, it can happen. And and this was happening a lot in greater Minnesota.
And we see it beyond Minnesota. Obviously, our
Hmm.
team does work around the country. And unfortunately, the same scenario generally plays over, right? Maybe a different cast of characters, a different set of needs or inputs, but at the end of the day, structurally, right, we find some of those similar challenges. As we shift, Barb, to kind of getting to a point of strategy, you and I were talking earlier about the fact that often the limiting factor to taking action is a lack of confidence, right? Even for our child care providers, some say, oh, they can't, oh no, they can do everything. It's a time issue. And just like our leaders, our community officials and others who are joining us today, there's a time factor. We got a regular job that requires us. We got our families and our life. But
Yeah.
then there's that idea of, oh my goodness, child care. Like there's kids involved. It becomes really, I mean, I'm somewhat replaying a version of
Hmm.
the conversation I hear with many community leaders who want to take action, but are somewhat limited either by time or a lack of just general confidence, right? And where do you feel confident to do that? And so maybe Barb, talk through. I'll share the screen here. Some of
Yeah.
the strategies, some of the things that communities, even without a knowledge of childcare, can begin somewhat organizing their thoughts along as it relates to kind of creating that foundation and strategy.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, Honestly, I think that there's a lot that they can do. I know since the pandemic, there has been a big increase in identifying, space and areas like what could we do? The old model was always, okay, I'm a family child care provider. I have a home and I'm going to do childcare in my home, which right has its benefits. I always used to tell providers you get to be home, you get to when your kids come off the bus, you get to be the first one to connect with them. Um, but we can think about like what are some other, I mentioned earlier, like with the pandemic, there was a hospital that we worked with where they said, well, we've got a room, we've got a space. Can you help us? And can you work with our community, our county, right? Because family child care, it's a county delegated system. So each county is responsible for doing the licensing. The license comes from the Department of Human Services, but each county follows similar structures, but yet has, variabilities depending on the community that they live in. So, I mean, you can definitely help support. What are some areas that you can support those providers? Are there areas? I've known a provider to operate in an old school and she rented a space. Thinking even just more simply, like what can you do to help support those providers? Here in Minnesota, we have a program, it's called the Wayfinders, which are available across the whole state, which helps providers get connected to a variety of different resources, potential for funding. What are some things, what are some grant programs that might be available in your area to help prop up providers? I would say most people are super excited to like jump at the chance, but they go, huh, it's going to be a considerable investment, right? I'm going to have to maybe do some, I have to put in some safety things, and I'm going to have to, consider how am I going to design my space and get that set up? And what am I going to do to ensure that my home is set up appropriately and safely, but yet also meets the needs of my family? With a lot of providers, I talk a lot about that and being able to help them, balance that. We can definitely help with that licensing navigation. I think a lot of providers just don't always know, don't even know what the regulations are, or how do I get connected to my county and get that level of support? So I feel like I'm sputtering a little bit there and
Oh, it's
rambling,
great. And
but right.
I think you're highlighting just as you finished up there,
Mm-hmm.
providers often, we hear from regularly is just having a sounding board. Maybe somebody who isn't a
Yes.
licensor, maybe somebody who
Yes.
isn't, it's somebody in the local community or a group, a
Mm-hmm.
chamber, a Rotary Lions Club, whatever,
Yep.
in
Yep.
essence adopts a provider and says, listen, we don't know anything about childcare.
Mm-hmm.
We know a little bit about kind of business thing. We know a little bit about this, but we know
Yep.
also how to solve problems, right? The one thing I find in almost every community I go to is there's problem solvers.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some cases,
Absolutely.
just having somebody's the proverbial standing by your side to go through that process and go, hey, I heard this from the license or whoever. I'm not picking on licensing, but that's often one that's got a lot of questions.
Yep.
Somebody who can say, hey, let's talk through that. Let's talk through a strategy. Let's do something where we can help with what we can help with. And if nothing else, just be somebody by your side. You seem to have a lot of
Absolutely.
success seeing that play out too.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I mean, most people come to family childcare or childcare in general. They know children, they love children. That's the part that they get excited about. They're already thinking about the activities and the art and what they're going to do and play outside. But then when it actually comes down to all the business pieces and how do I actually get this going, you're at a complete loss. And before the pandemic, there were associations, there were a lot of like community, not even community, but county associations available to offer some support to family childcare. There were even a lot of neighborhood groups, and since the pandemic, a lot of those have gone away. So, there's a huge need for support there.
The other thing that we highlight or we've talked about often and see as a challenge, and you talked about an actual site or a space, even
Mhm.
having a space now requires an investment to bring that space to life appropriately, right? So when we think
Yeah.
about this third bullet, essential materials, essential furnishings, just like any business who's starting a hardware store that opens without hammers isn't
Mhm.
really a hardware store, right? A restaurant that doesn't have half their seating and their menus printed isn't really a restaurant. And if we think about that in our normal terms, many of us might be experienced to, if a child care provider doesn't have an appropriate crib, Barb, what's the investment on that these days? Over 500, I think, something like
Yeah.
many
It
of
can
our
be.
startup
Absolutely.
grants,
Hmm. Yeah.
well-intentioned, offered by communities are $500. It barely can cover
Yeah.
the crib, let alone the books that kids might read, the toys they might play with, the preschool
Hmm.
table, all of those pieces. So part of maybe the opportunity is set right expectations.
Yeah.
If you were starting up and supporting a hardware business, what would they need to start up? Well, how much would it cost to get the inventory of hammers and nails and anything else that you expect to find there? Because if
That's
I
right.
don't start with that, my customers come in. If I do get customers, they're going to look around and go, where's the hammers? No different than if a family walked in and go, there's no books here, and my preschooler's going to kindergarten next year. There's a disconnect, right? And so
Hmm.
tell me, I mean, you see that as a challenge. You've shared stories when we've talked in the past about the limiting factor sometimes is the unrealistic expectation of what it takes to set up a true childcare space that really
Absolutely. Yeah.
tells us what we want to see.
Yeah. And well, I think too, I think there are people that uh come into it also that might have that fear that, oh, I have to be a preschool. I have worked over the years with, yeah, there are some individuals where their entire lower floor, and that was me, their entire lower level is set up like a mini preschool. It's completely separate from their family space. And so when they're done at the end of the day, they walk upstairs just like I did, and boom, now we've got our family space. Um, but there's also a lot of successful providers where, like you said, what does that look like, and how can we guide providers to take a look at their space, and how do you make your living room or your dining room table become a learning environment? How can you, and you got to think about like storage, and you think about where are you going to put books, and how are you going to make them available to the children during the daycare day. There was this one gal that I went to her home. It was like night and day. You showed up during the day, and it was in my head I almost felt like she like flipped this and opened up this and pulled this out, to even to the point where then the couches got covered with a sheet, and here it is, here's the daycare day, and at the end of the day, bloop 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 bloop, it's all back to her home living. And but for her, it was the perfect solution between, at 6 o'clock, I've got my life back and this is my family space. But then from, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., this is this nurturing, enriching environment. And so that's the other beauty, I think, with family childcare is there's so many ways that we can create these spaces and help providers become family childcare providers in a way that meets their needs and meets the needs of the families.
And we're even doing work with communities, matching more intentionally prospective providers who are looking for the opportunity with other workforce leaders and others who are looking for alignment, for instance, to second shift or to four
Mhm.
or any particular need. Many
Yeah.
of the operators that we work with, they're looking for a business case, right? To your point earlier, they want to do their trade, but they are not
Yeah.
necessarily as confident about or as maybe skilled as how to go engage that local manufacturing plant who just happens to need
Yeah.
10 slots of care second shift and would love to partner with a provider in a more
Mhm.
intentional way.
We have companies in Minnesota where the organization itself owns the home, and they have an agreement between the company and the family child care provider that's doing care in that home. As many as one organization, they have three separate programs, and they contract with a family child care provider to come in and provide that care. And I do believe one of the programs is designed so that it's overnight care.
Right. Well, and to the point of the materials, the equipment, all of those pieces.
Mhm.
I'm excited. Our finale session of summer series, investing in environments, really helping communities better understand when you're intentional about setting your space up, what the difference can be for the providers and the kids that they're providing care, right? Aligning all of those things to a programmatic focus can make certainly a big difference, right? And one that we don't want to overlook.
Yeah.
I know your role as you've come on among many hats you're wearing in the moment is our child care business advisor role, which is really that individual paired with a new
Yeah.
provider who's getting started, and it seemingly is aligned to this fifth bullet here, which is focused on coaching and training and all the different ways that happens. We sometimes think about that and we assume, gee, you've got to have an understanding of early ed and you got to do whatever, but it's really a lot more than that when we think about the coaching and training opportunities that regular everyday community members might be able to help support. Talk a little bit about what that looks like and maybe example of what you've seen where community has played a stronger role with a provider with coaching, training, either
Mhm.
directly or funding or otherwise.
Yeah. I've seen all kinds of things. One of the things I will share the example that I had when I started out as a family child care provider so many years ago was there was a program that was funded through Anoka County, and it was called the SOS program, or Starting Out Successfully. And basically, it paired me with a current family child care provider, somebody, well, actually, she might have been retired at the time, but no matter, right? Someone who's been in the field for a very long time. She came out to my home and literally, Barb, what do you need? And when she would come out, I'd be like, okay, this is what I'm struggling with. And she would help problem solve. Yeah, she was amazing. But that's just one example within the county. I also did some coaching myself with the Center for Inclusive Childcare, where we went out through the state, and there were two kind of bucket areas that we coached: health and safety coaching, which is, important when you're trying to get your business up and running, and then infant toddler coaching. So there are some things that are going on out there. I think there's a lot of research that has really kind of come full circle. Many of us think about the licensing process and becoming a family childcare provider, and we're very much aware that there's certain trainings you have to do, and you got to have so many hours in this topic and so many hours in this topic. But and it's helpful, it's important, everyone needs to get that base layer, right, of content knowledge. But what's really showing the benefit of having coaching and mentoring available for providers, someone who's been there, someone that can, talk real time and get some step-by-step guidance along the way.
And a clear distinction, I think you're highlighting between the startup support and the first year.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? One of the things that I think we focus a lot on helping communities think about is what's the plan after all the fanfare, all the balloons have popped, the celebration is completed, just like any small business owner. And that's really what we think about in particular with family childcare business owners, but also small childcare centers is in my work, I used to be a board of directors for a chamber. We got all these grand openings and they were wonderful. Families there, we're all celebrating. And I always pull the business owner aside towards the end and say, listen, now remember tomorrow, you wake up and the celebration, the music has died down and the weight of the world of all these things you're just not quite sure about kick in. We're still going to be there for you as a team. And it's the same idea that communities can deploy is beyond the grand opening and the picture in the local paper and all, we're going to be there. Right. And programs like Wayfinders that are driven at state and regional levels, if they exist, are great partners, great tools. But without them, don't let your lack of understanding of early ed and childcare be the limiting factor to being a partner. To talk once a month, check in with Miss Susie, Miss Betty, or whoever we might use to say, how are things going? And maybe everything's going great. Maybe there's a business challenge you feel confident about, but there's something else you go, I don't know anything, but I'm going to help you figure out who we're going to call.
Absolutely.
That means a million to any business owner, in particular, our smaller new childcare business owners.
Absolutely. I remember that distinctly. The first couple months going through the licensing process, and you're getting support from the county, you're getting, all the excitement, you're interviewing families who are equally excited about your program. And I distinctly remember my licensor like doing the one, final look through my space, and she goes, "Oh, this is just fantastic. Like, Barb, you're going to be busy. You're going to be full all the time." And so you have this high, like, "Oh, I'm going to be so great." And then the reality sets in, and that first year, my contracts, my policies, I tweak this, oh, I got to tweak that, oh, I got to tweak that. And so, like I said, it was helpful having the SOS program, because there are just going to be things that we don't think about. I mean, I thought I was pretty darn prepared for it. So
And as we get started in any community, just like anything else, we charge after having an understanding of what does success look, right? If your goal is 5 new family childcare providers at some point, well, what's that timeline for success, maybe, right? Give yourself realistic a reality check, but be clear, right? Whether you end up building a center because that's the right solution, you help support some new family providers, or a combination of everything in between. Going back to our stages of readiness, having a plan and understanding of what's our destination is critical. And even setting that expectation with a potential provider that you might bring in and host through a hosted space arrangement. I know we're really excited about the inaugural childcare house unfolding in Mapleton, Minnesota, but all of those opportunities come first with, here's what we're looking to accomplish, right? It allows us to right size our solutions. Is there any piece of advice that I guess overall, when you're thinking about this idea of starting to kind of organize oneself, one community, what would you think is the biggest thing to keep in the kind of the back of the mind, or as the compass, so to speak, of that work, would you say?
And you're talking in terms of
This
it's
community's role, right? What's the one thing, if nothing else, a lot of the few things that we
yeah,
highlighted today, what do you think the one most impactful thing that a community can do focused on one provider? What would you say
mhm.
that is right now? Is it support? Is it the
Yeah,
machines and
that's
equipment? Is it all
yeah,
of
like
the above?
honestly, I mean, I think it's going to depend on the individual, but I would say for sure. I mean, support is definitely, first and foremost, but depending on the individual, those startup grants are really, really helpful. Mine was $275.
Right.
And, I got all excited because I could buy a baby gate and a double stroller for my program. But let me tell you, over the years, I invested a lot a lot of money. So, having the financial supports is really helpful. And just having that, honestly, I think for anybody that gets into this business, I think having, a guide, someone to be there with them throughout.
And it's a great segue, right? When we think about getting that first success story, what
Mhm.
is it then that we can do to replicate that? What is it that we can do to ensure that not only that first win is sustainable and successful as long as the journey is meant to be, but to the point of creating a different environment. We're highlighting a few things here that help. I'll start to organize it, right? Thinking about if we do one, can we do it a second time? Can we do it a third time? Right. When we think about spaces, you go do your tour of spaces in the community, you're going to find one, we hope, but you might find four. But today you can only start with one. Well, the idea is to be thinking as you go through this process, what is it that was successful on one that we can apply to two, and the same exercise for three, and the same exercise for four. I think you also highlight, just based in your whole journey, that communication and messaging to not only the direct funders that might be helping underwrite or support this work, but to the broader community, showcasing, lifting, as you said, lifting up that provider. Talk a little bit about what you've seen be successful for communities that become more intentional around messaging success of a provider or several providers of, or just in general childcare. How do you see that impacting the opportunities in the future?
Ah, well, I mean, that's a really good question, honestly. What are we seeing? I mean, I think a lot of the attention, and again, this is not necessarily uh, a statement saying that centers are bad, but I think for a lot of our communities, especially in rural Minnesota, when it's more costly, it's harder to prop these up. The small businesses, the small family childcare providers are just a real viable solution. And there are, across the state, there are some communities that said, okay, yeah, we're taking this seriously. Like we've heard, there are a lot of providers out there that are very vocal and are trying to approach their legislators and say, hey, look, we need to, create some more opportunity. And I think there are some communities where they're taking notice. And what can we do? How do we help fund individual providers? How do we help support them? And a lot of counties are doing things a little, some are, doing like free trainings and offering opportunities such as that. Some counties support their providers. I know Ramsey County licensors, they like to promote their providers with, they do a banquet every year. They do a provider of the year kind of thing. And, doing those things to, make it be more seen and make providers feel, a part of the community because it can be a lonely field.
Well, and even I talked a few months ago with Michael Gallups, who's executive director at the Metro Press Chamber outside North
Mhm.
Texas, outside of
Mhm.
Dallas, and it was fascinating to hear. He's been very intentional about outreach to program. Matter of fact, just I think
Mhm.
a month ago they celebrated their first official member at
Yeah.
the Chamber of Commerce that was a child care center, and the leader of
Mhm.
that center said the only reason I joined is because Michael stopped by and just said, "Hey, how's things going? What can we
Yeah.
help with you? We see
Yeah.
you as a business owner as important as the biggest one we have in our community, right?" And
Yeah.
as he recounted that story, I recall him saying almost the grin that the provider had when it was suddenly like, you saw me. Now
Mhm.
I'm a member of the chamber, like all the other small businesses on Main Street and everything.
Yeah.
everything else. It's a when I'm hearing you say, and what Michael said, visibility is step one. Just having recognition, they're standing in front of you and
Yeah, yeah. Back when I was a provider, my food program, they had a yearly, it was provider of the year, so you applied to, you submitted an application and you actually had to go through an extensive interview process. And I became provider of the year that year. I think it was 2003 maybe. Yeah. And again, same thing. It was exciting for me. I got to go to the national conference for the National Association for Family Childcare. So Provider's Choice, had me out in all of their newsletters, this, that, and the other thing. I was put in the local paper. So, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see these good things happening and being promoted.
absolutely. And even in our smallest communities, newspaper is still a great source of
Yeah.
information, messaging, and often an opportunity to highlight a story, right? Both the positive and the journey to get there, which always has
Mhm.
marked with different points of of reflection of why am I doing this, right? But we
Yes.
know the reason why any small business owner does what they do is they have a vision, big or small, they have a vision where they're going. As we talked about other strategies to support that kind of continued growth, I've already highlighted kind of the technical assistance realm and thinking about it beyond just technical assistance for how to care for kids. Technical assistance about how to market. I was just with the child care center. I understand our localized strategy, but I said, what's our strategy to like let people here? And it was kind of again, great people, great operate, deer in the headlights, right? And so even a chamber professional who does marketing or whatever could hold a session for local providers, say, here's some basics for you,
Mhm.
right? There's really easy ways for us to play our part and play our role. We know funding is always an opportunity. I don't want to stick too long on there, but as we think about bringing more and more beneficiaries of a good child care system, it does highlight the opportunity to better align funding requests and asks to things that align with those we're asking from, right? And not just always going to the usual suspects. We have, in our
Mhm.
work funding roadmaps, over 15 sources of dollars to support childcare, all sorts of different reasons. Right? If you're just looking at one, you're missing out on a big ball of opportunity. I want to finish this section with, I think something you keep highlighting, we keep saying as maybe a theme, is this shared responsibility, right? Meaning that one entity often struggles to find the success that we're searching. Tell a little bit about where you've seen success or maybe lack of success either way when we brought more people together, when we tried to do it our own. What have been any of your experiences there?
Hmm. I think that the biggest thing I've had over the past 5 years is I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of local businesses about how can they submit ensure like there was one business that I talked about that they said, well, we want to be a preferred employer. And so, and what's interesting about this particular business is they actually had a childcare center on site, but yet they wanted to offer flexibility. They wanted to offer other options. And so we had the conversation about how can we take some spaces that currently exist on our campus and turn those into family childcare spaces. So to me, that was very exciting that they were looking at it like not like our only option isn't a center, but we recognize that some people really, this is what they want. They want, there was also somebody not too long ago that I was working with where they actually became a family child care provider. They wanted to, and they positioned themselves well within the community to make sure that they were serving a variety of businesses. And that particular individual was, she was the one who actually like reached up, hey, I'm here, and this is what I'm doing, and kind of started a little something. And she knew some other people, she knew some friends, and got some momentum going within the community, which I think was kind of cool. They did it on their own, but we're just seeing so much more of that. It's not just an individual saying, I want to be a provider, and then putting that information out there. We are seeing a lot more partnerships, whether it's council members, community leaders, even legislators are starting to get involved in the conversation.
which is great to see, right? We see that play
Hmm.
out in more and more communities. And for
Yep.
me, my own experience, not only just in the last 4+ years of business of childcare, but even before, the defining factor, the success of any project in any community ultimately comes down to who's at the table to make it happen,
Yeah.
right? Community center, new fire station, new childcare, new anything I ever asked communities about, what was the difference between the win or the not? The win always came when we had enough people here who saw a win for themselves, right? And I think that's a really good opportunity when we think about that shared responsibility and thinking about when we change the equation, when we go from just anybody, hey, we're open, anybody please come, we naturally end up with a group of people that are doing two things. I often say, one, running from something, or two, chasing towards something. And what we really want, the measure of success, is somebody who not only has all the supports, not only has all the community, but has a vision, and maybe doesn't know what that vision, how to make that vision come true. But I just did an interview a couple of weeks ago with a provider. She said, since I was a kid, I always wanted to be a family provider. And yet today she's still working in a center. She's doing great, but that's not her dream. And this community is going to pull her aside and say, what would it take for you to get started? Like, let's not us guess. Let's not us come up with an artificial something. Let's just sit down with somebody who's raised their hand and said, this is where I want to go. How can we
Hmm.
help them get there? It's often a lot less investment than you'd ever imagine. I had a banker who had gone through this exercise a couple of years ago, and I met with him after. He said she only needed 2,400 and she'd be ready to go tomorrow. And I said, no way.
Yeah.
$2,400 for 10
Yeah.
slots. That's not a bad investment to get 10 people back to work making a wage that ripples at a 1.4 effect in our communities, right?
Yeah.
But it was asking the question, it was creating the conditions. And I think you highlight another piece. Any community is looking to take action. I often remind everybody to ask yourself where they're going to write the check to. If somebody in the community, a small business, big business, otherwise wants to be a part of childcare, where do they write the check? Because they can't often write the check to Miss Penn. And so we think about, one of the things we help communities with is create that supporting infrastructure. And when I say that, we're not talking about a big operation, but even the legal entity that can appropriately take that and be the fiduciary to manage that, the fiscal agent, is a start to getting any work done. Because all of these efforts, we know, no matter how much goodwill and good hopes, don't work without some dollars in the account to make it happen. That's a great overview. I think it's a really good way for people to think about kind of what it looks like as you again start to move forward. We're quickly moving through time, which is exciting and disappointing because we're having such a great
Yeah.
conversation. But as we get closer to the end here, I want to talk a little bit about some strategies that, again, communities today, or maybe tomorrow when you got through the rest of today and the schedule you have, is what is it and how is it that we start, right? We always encourage people, give business of childcare a call, but we're also big believers that with the right tools, many communities are equipped to at least get started, at least get some understanding. I think that first one is a big one. Talk a little bit about it and just reiterate understanding that address for success as a starting point.
Hmm. Hmm. As I was looking at, like mapping the landscape and how do you identify, where that would have the greatest impact. I really think it just depends on your community. And I think about that, like here I live in like the Coon Rapids, Anoka area. And so I think of some of the bigger businesses in our area that has needs for childcare. I also started thinking about how across the state there's different groups. There is some support out there. We mentioned wayfinders earlier. There 5 districts throughout the state that support their wayfinders through different regions, and I know a lot of them are going out and they're going to different conferences, they're going to like parent meetings, where would parents gather, any type of thing like that to kind of figure out where is the need for more childcare and how can we get more people into the field. I don't know if that's exactly kind
Well,
of
I
what
think
I'm
it's a good
hoping for,
start,
but
right? It's that idea of just understand what's your beginning win.
yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe rather than spending 6, 12, 24 months to build up the plan, that starts to go stale even as you build it, then
Right.
you start with that one win, right? Just where we started. If you get one new provider, we showcase that we've got 10 families, 8 families, however many families have care, there's a natural buoy, right? Lift one boat, lift them all. And
Right.
so I think
Right.
understanding both the function and the potential geographic area. I had an example in a community not too long ago where one of the end action items in their activation plan was focus on this one neighborhood. Because through all the conversations, everybody said, number one, there's no childcare there. Number two, there's a lot of kids there that are showing up to elementary school that aren't as prepared or ready or whatever that term is we want to use. And I said, well, then I said, excuse me for a second. What if we just figured out a way to get one provider in that community to start with? And it went back to that comment earlier about, well, that just seems like so small. Seems like so small, right? But if we're going to localize our strategy, we're going to get some mechanisms of win that build that momentum. Gosh, seems to me that neighborhood that you all talked for over an hour about all the challenges might be the best place to start with one, right?
I promise you, you get one provider started. I said this earlier, providers talk. And, and you get one person, supporting that community and they're talking and you can see those benefits. You're going to have others come forward that say, this has always been something I thought about doing, but I didn't think I could, or I didn't know how I could, or I don't think I can see how I can make this happen in my home, or I was just worried that I would need $10,000 worth of equipment. Like you said, Jeff, earlier, that one provider said, if I had 2,400 bucks, I could make this work. Not everybody needs, a startup budget of 20,000. Some just say, if I had a couple $1,000 so that I could, I got rid of my high chair a long time ago. I don't have cribs anymore. But if I had some startup funding, I can make this happen. And yeah, it, yeah,
Starts with a conversation, right?
it really does. It really does.
To do it. As we get closer to the end here, and I encourage if you have questions, I should have mentioned this better ahead of time, put them into the Q&A section. We'll do our best as we wrap up here to answer maybe more specific questions to your area or to the things we've talked about. As we look at those other, moving from insight to action, I often think 2 and 3 could somewhat come together, right? We're going to want a team to support them. And in some cases, that's having just awareness with who the local licensor is, having awareness of who's going to make the decision on the zoning appropriateness or such, and inviting them for a conversation, right? And once we've done that, we know kind of what the parameters that we're going to navigate. Now we're in a much better, more confident place to put the call out for that first provider, right? It's a big deal. We've seen examples of projects where, number one, the applicants themselves were all new, sitting on the sideline because, again, they didn't have the home to do it in, or they didn't want to do it in, or all those reasons. We often think about that, and I hear this from communities. Well, how will we know anybody will want to do it? And I said, based on experience, and again, this is a newer idea, but it's allowed in function here in Minnesota, 18 other states, but for a good half of the country, you got to be in your home. And that speaks obviously around modernization of licensing and updating some of those opportunities. But when we think about it in this particular sense, I can guarantee you, and I'm willing to, I don't know what I bet, but I'm willing to guarantee any community that comes into this more intentionally, that has a focus of here's a potential business case, or here's some funding, or you will have a far better, different experience than many of our frontline folks who are talking to everybody, who some woke up this morning and said, boy, I think I'd be a great provider, to, the 22-year-old who graduated high school, got her 2-year early ed degree and just wants to run her own business, just like any other 22-year-old who maybe wants to go that track, right? There's so many opportunities, but as hopefully you're taking away today, a big part of it is our intentionality, our focus on the support. Those startup funds can make a big part of it. And then somebody to walk alongside, right? That's the big key thing. Somebody just walk along. You don't have to know anything other than being a cheerleader for somebody else who's doing what they're doing, right? And it's really a replication of our SBDCs, our small business development centers, and others. And I always say the distinction is we're not replacing that function, right? We need all of our partners to come into it. What we're saying is they have somebody in the community who maybe isn't in the field, who maybe isn't involved in any of this, who's just their person, right? Just the person like I was at the chamber way back when that said, listen, call me. And I sat and looked
Yeah.
at the ceiling with that burden of life in front of me as well. This has been a great conversation, Barb, and I want to, before we get to the end here, want to throw up one poll, last poll, opportunity as you think about your next 30 days to support a provider. What might be your first step? What's the next step? And everybody's at different places, but love to get an idea of those who are joining us today. And we thank you again for doing that. Where are you at? Where is it that your next step takes you as a community? And it can be just as simple as we're still trying to figure out where it is that we want to begin. So we'll give a minute for the poll there. As we think about kind of wrapping up, as we get to the end of, like I said, a really good conversation, we've talked about defining the opportunity. We've talked about laying that foundation, building our own local strategy that we can get behind, and frankly, we bring others with us. And then once we start to see those levels of success, what is it that we can do to not only ensure its sustainability, but work to replicate, right? Work to look at ways in which we can do that. So good answers here. Some folks still figuring out their gaps, others at that point of ending technical assistance. A really good opportunity for everybody to take any of these as a starting step that we know will lead to success. Yeah. Looking for if there's any questions. It's a quiet question box, and that's okay too. We hope that the content and our conversation has been good today. What else would you say, if there's anything else for a community to think about that we haven't touched on, or that you want to reiterate as we wrap up today, to just keep in mind as kind of that guiding compass towards their desired outcomes? Anything come to mind?
Honestly, as I was thinking earlier, I just think just having the conversation, I think you're going to be shocked at bringing this conversation up to the table within your communities, within those that you engage with. I think you're going to be shocked at how many people are probably thinking the same thing you are, and have been starting to kind of formulate like what ifs, and what if there was an opportunity, what if there was a system or technical assistance available to us to help us get to where we need to be. I feel we're on that cusp there where we really need to, jump in and solve some of these capacity issues.
Right, and I think the key takeaway there again is this idea that you can start small. You can start with one provider. You can start with a very local, specific, and you will win, even if it's not the final win. Right, every win builds to get there, and I think it's something that we often overlook, right? Because we're in such a critical need of childcare that matches the needs of our family. So supporting one provider isn't small, it's smart. And I think that's our...
If anything that has told us the success in that model is the pandemic, where we had communities, agencies, organizations, businesses propping up one family childcare provider, and it snowballed into something greater. So
yeah, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
A quick reminder, our next session, it's not part of the summer series, but next a live event actually coming up real quick on Thursday, the ROI of localized childcare, how communities are solving the infrastructure gap. We're going to talk about just the mechanics behind the math, framing this as an economic development opportunity, and really looking at two emerging models: hosted spaces, the idea of you have space or there's space available, that we create that setting that hosts a small child care provider. We'll also spend a little bit more deeper talking about the child care house and the impact that Mapleton on their inaugural journey to the first one is looking forward to, and the conversations that we're having with many communities that really drive that particular solution, one that came right from the field, right from the real experiences that communities all over are facing. That's coming up on Thursday. It's at 11 a.m. Start, another free event. We'll make sure to share information on our upcoming summer series events. We had a few calendar move arounds, and so we're fine tuning that, but a lot of topics. A great one on employers and the ROI of being a part of childcare. TUTRIS, a national emerging organization focused on putting all the pieces together, will be joining me as guests there. and mentioned we have economic development topic. We have a few other topics. We'll make sure to share that information. And if you're in a place where just having a quick needs assessment call, getting a check-in on, hey, Jeff or our team, here's where we're at, what might be some of our options, I encourage you to reach out to schedule that. And we have a lot of other resources, information on our website. Follow us on LinkedIn. Our July newsletter just came out yesterday. You'll probably find a post on that this afternoon, highlighting in a different end of the spectrum, how can you help spot a child care center that might be in crisis in your community? Our biggest opportunity is to retain what we have. We know that with employees, we know that with child care, we know that with everything. A lot easier to maintain what's already there than to have to start all over. And so if you've got a program that's in or potentially in crisis, gives you some good ways to see some of the signs, and also gives you, I think more importantly, some ways to potentially, without creating a situation, approach those centers as a community, as an entity, to say, hey, we noticed a few things, just want to check in, see if we might be able to open a conversation of support. We're finding a lot of success in our work in communities around the country through our child care center stability and growth program. Is really a community oriented and supported effort to help support that local child care center. The warning bells don't need to go off if we are intentional about looking for the signs, looking for the opportunities. And Barb, I've been a great guest today. So excited to have you on our team at Business of Child Care. This session will be available on recording on our YouTube channel. We'll publish that here by tomorrow. For anybody that missed it and should see it, I encourage you to share that information with them. And again, we thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful day ahead. Thanks, everybody.